Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be discussing 10 NHL players who will be traded at the trade deadline. Now this year's NHL trade deadline is pretty much a month away. We're now in the home stretch, boys. But which 10 players do I see being traded in the next month? And which 10 players do I see finding new homes at this year's trade deadline? Watch till the end for all my picks and opinions, and of course subscribe if you're new. Now a good thing to note is that this isn't the 10 most likely players to be traded, but 10 names, small and big, that I think will be traded at this deadline or maybe in the offseason too. But starting us out here today with my first player who I think will be traded at the trade deadline, I have Rangers backup Alexander Georgiev. Now Georgiev, for an interesting case here, I think will 100% be traded at this deadline. He's a guy that New York has been patient with, as they should be, but will likely get a ton of interest because he could be a starter in the future. For a team like Toronto or San Jose, there's really all the incentive in the world to go after him. Now personally, you obviously have the obvious candidates in Toronto and San Jose that I think will be the top contenders, but a team that I think will also be interesting to watch will be the Carolina Hurricanes. They made it known that they want some goaltending and for the future for sure. Yes, Peter Mrazek is fine, Reimer is fine, but they want a guy who can lead them to more, and Georgiev can be that. So I would look out for the Carolina Hurricanes in this scenario, even though Toronto and San Jose I think might be the front runners. But either way, for Georgiev, I think they might get a first-round pick for him, maybe even a prospect on top of that. But for a team like New York, they have all the leverage in the world, and I think we'll capitalize on it at this deadline. Now speaking of the Rangers, we're going to continue on them, now going to Chris Kreider, the next player who I think will be traded at this trade deadline. Now I've already mentioned him a ton in the past, but there's some new details coming out about Kreider, mostly because New York has been talking in negotiations, but it hasn't exactly gone the greatest so far. And I think for a team like New York, there really isn't much incentive to keep a guy like Kreider around. Sure, he's good, but I think his best days are behind him, and if you sign him to a 7-year deal, I don't exactly see that working out too well for them. I think there'll be a lot of interest on the trade market, as there should be. Now to me, as it stands right now, the three main contenders for Kreider would be the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Colorado Avalanche, and the Boston Bruins. Those to me might be the three most likely teams. Maybe the Pittsburgh Penguins come out of nowhere and end up getting him, but I don't think they have the cap space really to go and acquire him for pretty much nothing. To me, Boston, Tampa, Colorado are the main teams that'll go after him, and I think Tampa might just be the favorite at this point. But for a team like New York, just like the Georgiev situation, they could get a lot for Chris Kreider. Thinking on top of a first-round pick, a prospect as well. They're trying to go for young forwards that can be NHL ready, and in a Chris Kreider trade, they'll most certainly end up getting that. But now going off the New York Rangers into another team in the Metro, that being the New Jersey Devils, and for my third player who I think will be traded at the trade deadline, I have Kyle Palmieri. Now Kyle Palmieri recently has come into the rumor mill, but he's a guy that I think makes a lot of sense for New Jersey to trade. Comparison-wise, I really don't think they'll trade a guy like Blake Coleman. I think you trade a guy like Palmieri where he has the most value, and especially at the trade deadline could get a lot back. Right now he has an injured foot, but I think he will be back for the trade deadline, currently sitting at a $4.65 million contract for this year and next year as well. He wouldn't be a rental, but for a team that needs forward offense, Palmieri can bring a ton of that, and at a pretty decent price. Now to me, the three teams that'll be the most interested in him are the Buffalo Sabres, the Boston Bruins, and the Dallas Stars. But there will be a lot of interest for a guy like that. And even if he isn't traded at this trade deadline, I think an off-season trade is entirely possible. Again, for a team like New Jersey, I don't think they're going to strap everything off the roster, but to me, Sami Vatanen will go also on top of Palmieri, which will make them get some pretty great assets back. But now moving on to my fourth player who I think will be traded at the trade deadline, I'm going to go with wild forward Jason Zucker. Now Zucker is a huge piece, and this is a guy that might not be a trade deadline trade, but maybe more of an offseason guy. But either way, I see Zucker right now getting traded in 2020. He's a guy that for Minnesota has been in the rumor mill for a long time. I still don't understand why they want to trade him because I think he's one of their best players when he's consistent and healthy. But for a team like that, he'll have a lot more years at $5.5 million, 4 more years to be exact. He's at age 28, and for a team that needs offense, there's not that many better options right now on the trade market. Now, obviously the teams that are interested change if it's the trade deadline or in the offseason, but in general, I think the three teams that'll be interested are the Colorado Avalanche, the Calgary Flames, who have been interested in for a while reportedly, and also the Philadelphia Flyers, who I think would be a very interesting, underrated team to get them. They would have some cap space after this season. I think it would be an off-season trade if they do go after that, but after that year, they'd have Justin Braun off the books, Brian Elliott off the books, and would be able to squeeze Jason Zucker in for sure. But those three teams would be the most interested to me. That any team that needs offense, especially at the wing, would be very wise to at least consider Jason Zucker. He can provide a lot of that, and consistently too. And now heading on to number 5, and one of the more sad players on this list, that being Jake Gardner. Unfortunately, I think Jake Gardner will be traded sooner than not, and with the whole contract that he got last season with Carolina, it hasn't exactly worked all well. Right now he is at 4.05 for the next 4 years, and with Carolina has not been that great of a fit. It's mostly because of ice time that he's getting 5th minutes, but he doesn't exactly deserve too much more than that. But for a team that needs defense, especially offensively, there's not many better options than Jake Gardner, and he would likely come pretty cheap, especially compared to a couple of years ago. Now, it's a little bit tricky because with Jake Gardner, he has a 7-team no-trade list, so it will be a little bit more complicated. But to me, the three teams that would be the most interested would be Chicago, Colorado, and Vegas. Three teams that, whether it be in the trade deadline or in the offseason, would love to have him. He has had a down year. He hasn't played the greatest, which to me signals that for Carolina, a trade is pretty much inevitable. Speaking of inevitable trades, we're now going to go to the LA Kings and my 6th player who I think will be traded at the trade deadline, that being Tyler Toffoli. Now, Tyler Toffoli, 1 year left on his deal at age 27. When it comes to low risk and maybe even great returns as a rental, Tyler Toffoli is one of the best right now. He has had a very underrated year with LA when he's actually played. He's been pretty great, and for a team that needs that extra offensive boost, Tyler Toffoli could definitely bring that. But we're going to move on from the obvious in Tyler Toffoli to the less obvious. And for my 7th player who I think will be traded at the trade deadline, I have Tomas, Tatar, baby, of the Montreal Canadiens. Now, currently sitting at age 29, a $4.8 million contract for this year and next year. Unfortunately, with Montreal, I think they're going to trade him inevitably, whether it be at the trade deadline or in the offseason. I think it's going to happen. Right now, Montreal pretty much just seems hell-bent on wanting to get rid of him. I don't know why. I think he's a fantastic player and will be great for the future. But for a team like Montreal who wants to sell off the assets, I think Tatar will unfortunately be a victim of that. Now, personally, the three teams that I think would be the most interested in him would be the Buffalo Sabres, the Washington Capitals, and the Dallas Stars. Now, for Buffalo and Dallas, I think it would be a trade deadline deal, but for a team like Washington, I think it would be an off-season deal. For instance, when it comes to Washington, which I think would be a very interesting subject, they have Holtby coming off the books. They also have Gudez coming off the books. That's some pretty big cap hits right there that can afford Washington to get a guy like Tatar, which I think will be an excellent fit for them. But whether they need offense or not, Tatar is an excellent player that should get a lot where he goes. I think for a team like Montreal, I think he's worth a first-round pick, if not more. Now we're going to continue with the Montreal Canadiens side of things, and going to my 8th player who I think will be traded at the trade deadline, I have Geoff Petrie. Now Geoff Petrie makes $5.5 million for this year and next year. Again, just like Tomas Tatar, not in the cap hit, but in the length. But when it comes to Petrie, I think he will be a trade deadline deal. But for a playoff team that is in need of that, he will likely cost a lot, not just in the cap hit, but in the actual asking price. But again, I think he might be worth it. And again, he might be even a long-term part of the team that he ends up going to, which is a reason why I don't think the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to be considered whatsoever. So in saying that, I think he will be going to the Western Conference, and for the three teams I think will be the most interested in him, that being the Colorado Avalanche, the Vegas Golden Knights, and the Vancouver Canucks. Now the Canucks are kind of a more wacky option, but right now they're in the playoff race and could use that extra bump defensively. But for a team like Vegas, who is already interested, and Colorado, who has a ton of cap space, I think those three teams make a ton of sense. And for a guy like Petrie, I don't know if Montreal is the place right now. I think going to a contending team that Montreal obviously has proved to not be might be the best thing for his career. But now we're getting into number 9, my 9th player who I think will be traded at this year's trade deadline. This is a player that unlike some of the other players, I think he's 110% going to be a rental, going to be a trade deadline acquisition, that being Brendan Dillon of the San Jose Sharks. Now, Brendan Dillon is a guy that I think would be a really good ad for a lot of teams. And I think when it comes to San Jose, you might just look at their defense and say, oh, everybody's playing bad. But Brendan Dillon, from what I've seen, I mean, I like the Sharks. I like them quite a bit, and I watch them quite a bit. And when it comes to the stats and everything, Brendan Dillon has been their best shutdown defenseman, which is not saying too much. But I think when it comes to consistency and experience and everything you'd want in a guy like that, Brendan Dillon does bring that. And right now, sitting at $3.2 million for this year, he will be a perfect rental for a team that needs that extra bit of help on D. But now we're going to get into my biggest hot take for this video. My number 10 pick for the 10th player who I think will be traded at the trade deadline. Yes, this is bold, this is crazy, but in my opinion, the San Jose Sharks will not just trade Brendan Dillon at this trade deadline, but will also trade Brent Burns. There, I said it. I'm not going to hold it back. To me, the San Jose Sharks are going to trade Brent Burns, and it's pretty much an inevitability at this point. It was reported that Doug Wilson wants to get a first-round pick at this trade deadline to recoup some of the losses that they gave to the Ottawa Senators in the Erik Karlsson deal, and it was also floated around that Brent Burns or Tomas might be the guy to go. And to me, Brent Burns just makes a lot of sense. He has not had a great year this year, and he comes relatively cheap for defensemen, $8 million, but that term is a big problem going until 2024, 2025, when he's like 41 years old. It is not the greatest contract whatsoever, but it's also a contract that they could potentially move if some sweeteners are there too. But for a team like San Jose, again, I think their priority now is to just rebuild in some ways. I don't think they're going to strip the whole roster, but I think some guys will go. I really don't think Vlasic, there's going to be anybody taking him on that contract. It's so bad. $7 million until 2025, 2026. It is horrendous. But to me, you can move a guy like Brent Burns. He has not had the greatest year, but I don't exactly see that lasting too long. And there's not exactly a ton of teams that right now can take an $8 million contract for a bajillion more years. But to me, there are two teams in the Western Conference that could take it on, that being the Colorado Avalanche and the Winnipeg Jets. To me, Winnipeg might be the most interesting option, especially if Dustin Byfuglien is gone, which right now is looking like the case. That's a team that could use something that is just not there at this point. But a guy like Brent Burns would be a pretty big ad. To me, that is more of an off-season trade if we do end up seeing it, but even if it is at the trade deadline, I wouldn't be too surprised. But in my opinion, for a team like San Jose, I feel like Brent Burns will be the guy to go. At least the big one. I think Brendan Dillon is a much bigger chance, but I think we will see Brent Burns traded in the next year. But that'll be it for today, guys. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Comment down below your thoughts on my picks once again, what you agree and disagree with. Share this video with your friends. Get the word out there that Brent Burns might not be a San Jose Shark. Once again, do not at me. You heard it here first, folks. My name's Dave, and I'll see y'all next video or stream. Goodbye.